Revolution by Maria Torres, illustrated by Donna Perron. Page 3. In the courtyard of an old hacienda in the small town of Querétaro, near Mexico City, 3 girls sat sewing. The year was 1810. "Michaela, is your sweetheart coming tomorrow?" Michaela turned to her little sister, Leona, and smiled. She knew the girl loved to tease her. 12-year-old Elena took the taunts more seriously. "Leona, he is not Michaela's sweetheart," she said scornfully. "You are only 10 anyway. What do you know of sweethearts?" "Shush, Elena," said Michaela, patting her lightly on the arm. She knew that Elena didn't like to talk of romance. Though Elena liked Michaela's captain, Michaela could understand why the subject upset Elena. If Michaela had a sweetheart, she would soon be married, and Elena did not want her to leave the house. Page 4. Michaela picked up her embroidery. "Look at this," she said to her sisters, laughing. She pointed to a line of oversized, tangled threads, obvious mistakes. "Why, I do believe Father has been trying to finish my sampler." Of course, the mess was Michaela's. She had no patience for sewing, and her sisters knew it. Leona giggled, leaning into Michaela's shoulder, but Elena still scowled. "Elena," Michaela commanded, "go and fetch Father to fix these stitches. Tell him that carelessness will not be tolerated." Elena pinched her lips, trying not to smile. But Michaela knew she could not resist the laughter, and despite Elena's efforts, the girls joined in her sister's giggles. The sisters enjoyed their moment of silliness, for the household was tense. Father did not support the movement for Mexican freedom that Mother did. Michaela and her sisters did not take sides, but their sympathy lay with the freedom fighters. Michaela peered at her sisters as she pretended to embroider. She wondered if they knew how serious the disagreement was between their parents. She hoped that they didn't. In her heart, Michaela knew that her father secretly supported the freedom fighters, but as a government official, he could not openly befriend or support them. Others had been dismissed from their jobs for less. Rumors about harsh treatment to traitors circulated freely. Michaela sighed. Life was so difficult these days. Page 5. As the 3 girls sat sewing on the patio, their voices rose to their mother's room on the 2nd floor of the old hacienda. Doña Josefa Ortiz de Dominguez smiled. She loved all her children, of course, but Michaela was special. Smart, pretty, strong. Sometimes it seemed that her oldest daughter had everything, and that made Doña Josefa nervous. Was misfortune overdue for Michaela, waiting for the right moment to darken her life? Doña Josefa forced that morbid thought out of her head and tried to enjoy the lovely sound of her daughter's laughing. Despite the disapproval of many of her friends and neighbors, Doña Josefa had taken plans to educate her daughters. She had never understood why women should not be educated, so she taught her girls to read and write. She herself had learned to read, and books had not spoiled her, so they would not spoil her daughters. Of course, she also taught them other skills. They could sing, play music, and dance, all traditional accomplishments for young ladies. They learned to sew and to cook. At 14, Michaela could already plan an entire dinner party. Yes, her daughters were fine ladies, but more importantly, they could think for themselves and possessed independent spirits. Page 6. But Michaela could also flirt, Doña Josefa thought, wondering where her oldest daughter had learned this questionable skill. Michaela was still too young for a husband, and Captain Allende had important work to do. Now was not the time for either of them to marry. Doña Josefa did not oppose the idea of their marriage, for, after all, She had married at 16. But with talk of revolution, now was not the time to contemplate marriage, especially as Captain Allende was one of the freedom fighters her husband opposed. Like her daughter Michaela, Doña Josefa tried to push thoughts of revolution from her mind. Soft September breezes blew through the windows. Doña Josefa picked up her book. With luck, she could finish it before tomorrow's meeting of the Querétaro Literary Society. Doña Josefa encouraged other women to read. Hosting a literary society was one way to ensure that women engaged in this important pastime. Besides, it was wonderful to talk about things other than family and fashion, and books offered many opportunities for discussion. Doña Josefa thought that if the men could hear the forceful ideas that the women discussed, they might be surprised. Indeed, many would probably be angry. In Spanish high society, women were not supposed to have strong opinions of their own. Doña Josefa managed to keep her opinions and her secret work with the poor Indians hidden from her husband and his friends. But sometimes, in the heat of an argument, her true feelings surfaced. Page 7. Downstairs, Don Miguel Dominguez sat behind his massive desk in a large room that opened into the public square. Leaning heavily on the desktop, he cupped his head in his hands. The headache that had been building for the past hour was now in full bloom. Page 8. Don Miguel's office also served as a courtroom. As corregidor, he sometimes acted as a judge. More often, he gave orders for others to carry out. Today, he had received orders from the viceroy, orders that could shred the very fabric of his family life. He hated this task, but was powerless against it, and he dreaded how his wife and daughters, particularly Michaela, would react. Page 9. Don Miguel sighed. He was duty-bound to follow the viceroy's commands. The viceroy was Mexico's representative of Spain, which ruled this country. As corregidor of Querétaro, Don Miguel represented Spain in his area of Mexico. These orders, he wanted to pretend that he had never received them, but he could not. So with a sigh, he reread the instructions, somehow hoping that with a few extra minutes would come a solution. A few minutes later, an officer knocked, then entered. Don Miguel looked up at the man in front of the desk. With a deep sigh, Don Miguel signed 2 arrest warrants and handed them to the officer. More trouble for his headstrong daughter, he thought. Michaela seemed more than half in love with handsome Captain Allende, and now he had to order Captain Allende's arrest. It was a shame that the handsome captain thought more about revolution than of marriage. If only he had not been so vocal in his opposition to the Spanish rule. Don Miguel wondered when the young, so impetuous and full of ideas, would learn to curb their tongues. Page 10. Young Allende was not completely wrong. Don Miguel reminded himself. Spanish rule was not good for Mexico. Still, if he did not follow the viceroy's orders, he would surely lose his position. He might even be imprisoned. Then he could no longer provide for his wife and family, nor could he protect them. But sacrificing a young man who had won the heart of his eldest daughter did not make him happy. Don Miguel sighed and wondered why life had to be so complicated. Times like this made him feel more like an evil dictator than a benevolent judge. Don Miguel reread the last lines of the viceroy's second order. You should have controlled her earlier. Now it is too late. You must lock up your wife immediately, for she plots with traitors and rebels. Sighing, he dipped his pen in the inkwell and wrote his reply to the viceroy. All is done as you have ordered. Folding the paper, he sealed it with melted wax, into which he pressed his official ring. With that sad duty completed, Don Miguel left his office and went upstairs to find his wife. How could he fulfill the command of imprisoning his own wife? but he thought he had no choice. For her own safety, she must be placed under house arrest. Don Miguel would rather have his wife hate him for a while than to be tried for treason and executed. He hoped she would see how much he still loved her. Page 11. He found Doña Josefa upstairs, reading in her sitting room. At 40 years of age, she had borne him 14 children, 12 of whom still lived. She still showed the passion and beauty that had once won his heart 2 decades earlier. He considered himself a lucky man to have married such a woman. He smiled as he remembered his mother telling him that Doña Josefa was too strong-willed to be a good wife. Don Miguel knew that his wife was opinionated, but she also had a keen intelligence and often gave him sound advice. Josefa's quick intelligence and sense of humor fascinated him. As he watched her read, Don Miguel remembered how he had ignored his mother's warnings. He had never regretted his decision to marry her, not even now. "Beloved," he said, waiting for the welcoming smile that usually transformed her face. He took a deep breath. "I have very bad news. The Viceroy has ordered me to arrest the captain at once, and your own friendship with Padre Hidalgo and the captain has been noted. You too are suspected of rebellion and treason. I am ordered to confine you. You are under house arrest. This is not my decision, but I cannot disobey. For your own safety and that of your daughters, I beg that you listen and obey me this time." Page 12. Doña Josefa's smile faded. Don Miguel had never asked her to obey him. Unlike many other couples, their marriage was based on the idea of an equal partnership. Don Miguel looked away. "I am sorry," he said in a low voice. "At least you may remain here in your own room." Crossing the floor, he closed the bars and the shutters. Then he left, shutting and locking the massive wooden door. Doña Josefa heard the iron bar drop into place. She knew in her heart that her husband was simply following orders and that confining her was not his choice. Still, it hurt her deeply that they did not share the same vision of Mexico's future. Doña Josefa waited until she was sure that her husband had returned to his office before she began to formulate a new plan. She had to abandon the old one. She could no longer be a messenger. But who could take her place? Moving to the outer windows, Doña Josefa opened the shutter a crack. In the plaza below, 2 soldiers stood guard. She knew neither of them. Raised voices rang outside her door as she clicked the shutters back in place. Page 14. A short while later, the cook entered, grumbling about the rudeness of the soldier stationed outside the door. "Your supper, Señora," she said, and laid out a fine meal. Doña Josefa thanked her for the food, then whispered an urgent message. The 2 women's eyes met, and the cook nodded with understanding. A new plan had come to Doña Josefa. She wondered if it was too risky. Was she making a mistake she would regret for the rest of her life? She still had her husband, but if something went wrong, Don Miguel would never forgive her. Taking a deep breath, Doña Josefa decided that the success of the revolution was more important than anything else, even her marriage. Page 15. An hour later, a young servant woman appeared at Doña Josefa's door. She wore plain, dark clothing and a shawl over her head. If the shawl had not been shadowed her face, Doña Josefa would have recognized her daughter Michaela. In the servant's arms were a bundle of clothing, a basin, and a pitcher of water. This time the guard did not allow the servant to enter Doña Josefa's room. Instead, he carried the dinner dishes out to her. Then he searched the nightclothes she carried before giving them to Doña Josefa. Michaela scurried away quickly, nearly dropping the heavy tray as she went down the stairs. Thank goodness the soldier had not recognized her. In the patio, she set the tray in a dark corner. Quickly, she lifted each dish and finally found the message her mother had written. She stuffed the piece of paper inside her dress. Then she ran upstairs to her room. Thrilled that her mother had entrusted her with this important task, Michaela prayed that she was worthy of her mother's confidence. Her mother had said that she could trust her sisters, that the women were in this fight together. Page 16. Gently, Michaela shook Elena awake. Elena would have to cover for Michaela when father came in to check on them. Shh, whispered Michaela, putting one finger to her lips. She pointed to little Nicola, who still slept soundly. Elena lit a candle. Together, with trembling hands, she and Michaela opened the door. Mama wants you to warn Padre Miguel and the captains, Elena exclaimed. And I shall, replied Michaela. I will not let Captain Allende be arrested. Michaela thought of the fiery speech Allende had given when he was last here, and how thrilled Mother had been. Of course, Father had frowned. Michaela knew that she had no choice but to help her captain. She felt this need as a young patriot, not just as a young woman in love. How will I escape from the house? Asked Michaela. Soldiers are standing guard in the plaza, and Papa locks every door at night, and he checks on us. Our bedroom window is not on the plaza, Elena replied. Quickly, help me. Michaela was relieved. Her sister, always the practical one, had the solution. Page 17. Michaela watched as Elena gathered up the sheets from their beds and began to twist and tie them together. Quickly, the two sisters fashioned a sheet rope. Then they tied it around a heavy bureau and lowered it out the window. Cautiously, Michaela climbed out the window and made her way down the wall. When she reached the ground, she signaled to Elena to pull up the rope and carry out the rest of their plan. Stuff the sheet rope under Michaela's cupboards. On the ground below, Michaela wondered whether their plan would fool Father when he glanced in the room. She crouched beneath the window for a moment, gathering her thoughts. Michaela did not know where Captain Allende was, but she was determined to reach him with her mother's warning. Page 19. Suddenly, Michaela remembered their friend Padre Hidalgo. She knew that he would get word to Captain Allende, but Padre Hidalgo lived miles away in Dolores. By the time she reached him, it would be too late. No, she must find help here in Querétaro. Then came a sudden inspiration. The Querétaro Literary Society. In her head, Michaela reviewed what she knew about each member. The meetings were for adults only, so Michaela had not actually attended the meetings. But her mother knew that her oldest daughter loved to read and discuss books, so she had arranged the meetings so that Michaela could hear everything that was said. Often, Michaela simply sat in a corner and pretended to sew while the discussion floated around her. Later, she and her mother would discuss the books together. During this time, when Spain ruled Mexico, Spaniards enjoyed more rights than native Mexicans. Padre Hidalgo worked with many Indians whom he insisted were equal to any Spaniard. He had declared that Mexico should be independent. The members of the Querétaro Literary Society were proud to be Mexican, and most of the women in the group supported Padre Hidalgo. Some contributed money to the Padre, while others, like her mother, helped to teach the poor. Michaela struggled to recall each member's loyalties. She must choose the correct person to turn to for help. Page 20. Jasenia! After deciding to trust this friend of her mother's, Michaela hurried through the silent streets. She stayed close to the walls of the houses, grateful that she knew exactly where Jasenia lived. She had been there many times. At night, though, the streets looked different. So empty of people, shadows filled the corners and obscured the door fronts. Michaela shivered as a cloud crossed the face of the moon. What if she had chosen badly? Sometimes people did not mean what they say, but Jasenia's family had seemed so passionate in their speeches. Most importantly, Michaela knew that her mother trusted them. Michaela prayed that her instincts were correct. Finally, the dim outlines of Jasenia's house came into focus. Candlelight shone through the shutters of the room where Jasenia slept. Carefully, Michaela gathered a few small stones. One by one, she threw them up at the shutters. Jasenia peeked out cautiously. Seeing her friend's daughter, she motioned toward the kitchen garden. Luckily, Jasenia's family had left the kitchen door open. Jasenia hugged Michaela. "What are you doing here?" she asked. "Are you meeting Captain Allende? Won't your father be angry?" "There's no time to lose," Michaela told her. "There's an order for Captain Allende's arrest. Take me to your father right now." Jasenia's father was mayor of Querétaro. Page 21. Jasenia's parents were still awake and cautiously greeted their night visitor. Michaela's words tumbled over one another as she told them of her own father's actions and her mother's urgent request. "Brave girl," Jasenia's father explained. "You have your mother's wit and daring, but if she is imprisoned, you are no longer safe. None of us are. I will ride immediately to warn the others. You must come with me. We may just have enough time, if we ride like the wind." Page 22. Later, Michaela remembered that night as a blur of running horses and starlight and frantic voices. She rode with Jasenia's father as he carried the news to other members of the group. Listening, she learned that the Viceroy's information was correct. The freedom fighters had been planning revolution. The date of the coup was set for December. Now they could not wait. The mayor urged every person to come to Dolores in the morning. Michaela knew she would be there too. As a teenager, she might still be considered a child by some, but she was part of the revolution now. Soon, morning dawned. Michaela stood among a restless, anxious crowd in front of the Dolores church. A few of them seemed rich, like her own family. A few were military men, like Captain Allende. Most were poor campesinos. All had responded to the resounding clamor of church bells. Silver-haired Padre Hidalgo stood on the church steps, his proud bearing marking him as a leader. He described the ways that colonial government abused the people. He urged the people to seize power. He told them to support one another. Michaela listened to every word. Like the rest of the crowd, she cheered his call for independence. With the others, she raised her voice to join in his cry of freedom. "Viva Mexico! Viva Independencia!" And so the revolution began. Page 24. The Mexican War of Independence began in Dolores on September 16, 1810. Doña Josefa Ortiz de Dominguez and Don Miguel Dominguez, Padre Hidalgo, Captain Allende, and the mayor of Querétaro are all historical figures. Doña Josefa and Don Miguel did have 12 living children. One of their daughters was betrothed to Captain Allende. Doña Josefa, imprisoned in her own house, managed to send word to the rebels. No one knows exactly how she accomplished this dangerous mission. The end.